Hey everyone, welcome back to the Nello Reads channel. Our first nuclear revenge story of the day comes from Effective Fix 3235. Never piss off a rich redneck. This is a story about my grandparents' friend. I was a young teen, but given the outcome, this story has stuck with me. I've sat on it for a while, but it's so satisfying to see a gaggle of Karens taken down a notch, so I figured I'd finally share it. For the sake of this story, we will call my grandparents' friend William. Now, my grandparents knew William from way back. My grandmother knew him from school, and my grandfather met him after marrying my grandmother. Anyway, in the 60s, Grandma was a manager at the local 7-Eleven. William led a crew that went there every day. It was the only gas station in a 30-minute radius, so everyone knew everyone in that sleepy coastal town kind of way. Now one day, William was doing a job down on the waterfront and slipped, fell, and broke his back. While he was healing from the operation and was broke as a joke, my grandma would always make sure to send him something to eat that she'd pay for when the crew would come in to grab their snacks and gas up, knowing William would simply skip the meal to save money for his own family. My grandpa also took him to several doctor's appointments, since William couldn't drive for a while and his tiny little wife couldn't wrangle him into a car by herself. William never forgot that. 20 years later, when he sold off his now very successful business and was a millionaire about 20 times over, he promptly told 90% of the world to, quote, go to hell, but kept those that had always been there for him close. Meanwhile, he never moved from the house that he had before he was rich. His only concessions to his wealth were trips with his wife to see the world and buying up quite a few acres of forested land around him. If you weren't his friend, you'd take him for every other blue-collar worker in the town. There was absolutely nothing obvious to show that he was worth tens of millions of dollars. After his wife died in the 90s, William decided to take up a new hobby. As he lived outside of the city limits, he set up a sawmill and woodworking shop, got all the proper permits and everything. The saws were in a big old enclosed building in the middle of all that land, so in all honesty, no harm, no foul, right? Wrong. The family that owned the forest behind William's land had just sold it to developers. Thus, a new luxury gated neighborhood, the first in the area, was born. Enter a plethora of Chads and Karens who were mostly from up north and had moved down south to take advantage of the better weather and the nearby beach. It didn't take long before they decided to take offense to his little business venture on the other side of the 10-foot wall of their neighborhood because it, quote, didn't fit with the image of their community. You know, the community he was decidedly not a part of. So, they sued him. Didn't even try to start a dialogue with him, just up and sued him. William was livid. He was your typical coastal redneck, and he would not be told what to do on his own property. It was not within city limits, nor located in an HOA. William countered with professional noise studies that showed that some of the kids in the neighborhood drove vehicles that made more ambient noise than his little operation. Nope, the people in the neighborhood simply threw more money at the lawyers to continue on with the lawsuit. Essentially, their plan was to bleed him dry. Their lawyers, who were not locals, actually told William's lawyer that he should probably advise his client to close the shop so that he wouldn't end up bankrupt due to the resources being thrown at him from the homeowners. Due to the relatively modest surroundings of his home, the neighbors nor their lawyers had any idea that the man was actually richer than just about all of them put together. All they saw was an older dude who drove a beat-up 80s model truck and wore Dickies jeans and work shirts that lived in what appeared to be a relatively modest home, especially compared to their McMansions. When William's lawyer told him about that conversation, William lost his effing mind. I clearly remember his screeching into my parents' driveway in that old work truck, cussing up a storm and ranting and raving before he even got in the house. Why did he come to our house? Because my grandmother, bless her heart, was known as one of the most giving people in the world, unless you made her mad. If you hurt her or someone she cared for, she became one of the most vindictive a-holes that could be found in that town. I am not kidding when I say that her ability for revenge served cold was legendary among the locals. So William had come to the house for a dose of her deviousness. Us kids weren't allowed inside during that conversation, but after he left that day, I later heard the adults talking about how he proceeded to hire quite a few private investigators to see if there would be any dirt to dig up on the homeowners. Lo and behold, there was a copious amount of dirt to be found. I still remember him positively crowning about it to my grandparents one fine summer day months later. That 60-something-year-old man was as gleeful as the proverbial kid on Christmas morning. Why? Because after he learned what his little private army dug up, he started making some phone calls to various acquaintances in high places. The ensuing fallout meant that the lawsuit was dropped. There was quite a list of misdeeds that were discovered, but here are some that stuck out to me. There were more than a handful of individuals that owed back child support. William very helpfully had the private investigators provide the mothers updated addresses and employment information so that they could pursue said child support / garnishment if they wanted to. On top of that, the IRS became very interested in several of those people as well as various other neighbors. Finally, one household ended up in prison because the investigators realized they were drug dealers, and the pictures of the transactions caught by the private investigators were handed over to the sheriff's department. Moral of the story: never piss off a rich redneck. Not gonna lie, that's pretty legendary. If William didn't have money, I can almost guarantee that his new rich neighbors would have gotten their way. So I'm glad he decided to fight and prove to them that they couldn't just strong-arm their way into getting what they wanted. Hopefully, this whole thing taught them to mind their own business. Our next story comes from MOFUQ. They kicked my friend's mom out, so we trashed their store and got it shut down. Okay, I realize this may sound terrible, but you have to read through the whole story. This happened about 15 years ago when I was living overseas. Now I'm in the US. Let's just say I used to live in a developing country back at the time. Me and my friend, let's call him Han, were driving around the city one night when he got a phone call from his older brother, who we'll call Barry. The phone call, from what I was able to comprehend, was pretty intense. After Han hung up, he was pretty frustrated. He told me to drive over to the supermarket near his parents' house, so I did. I asked Han what was wrong. He said it looks like Barry had gotten into a fight and that he needs our help. On our way to the supermarket, Han called a couple of our friends and told them to meet us there for extra support. I know how this may sound. It sounds like we're a bunch of gangbangers looking to go start some crap. So before y'all start jumping to conclusions, let me give you some background. The community I used to live in is heavily tribal. It's not about ganging up, but more like standing up and being there for a friend in need. That's the common mindset, and that's just their way of life. It's pretty backwards in this day and age, and it's worth pointing out that I'm completely against that mindset now, especially now that I'm living in the US. But anyway, we eventually arrived at the supermarket. It was in a very busy and vibrant area with lots of traffic. We parked our cars at the front door and stood out in the street waiting for Barry until he showed up. He was enraged, yet calm and on point. We asked him what was going on, so he explained. Apparently, Barry and Han's mom went into the supermarket to buy some chicken. She did manage to buy some chicken in a sealed container. She needed it to cook for the day, but when she got home and opened the container, the chicken smelled absolutely rotten and disgusting. Understandably, she decided to go back to the store and return it, notify the store management, and get another chicken that isn't salmonella in a box, since she shops there quite often. I know my friend's mom. She's not a Karen in any way, and she's this super sweet lady in her 60s who is very friendly with everyone she meets. When she went into the store, found the store manager, told him about the rotten chicken, and asked him politely to give her a different one, she was even discreet about it and didn't want other customers to hear. The manager was super rude and refused to acknowledge that there was anything wrong with the chicken. He outright refused to exchange the chicken and wouldn't even smell or look at it. He called her a liar and told her to, quote, get the hell out of his store. Han, having learned that his mom was insulted that way, was pretty furious. Barry told us that he was going inside to talk to the manager and give him a piece of his mind, and that he wanted us to be there on standby in case things went down. We agreed and waited outside. Barry went in. We were looking at him through the glass door. We saw him speak to the manager with a clear understanding of how heated the conversation was getting. Basically, Barry asked the manager if he's the one who told his mom to get the hell out, and the manager said, quote, "Yes, and you get the F out too," and shoves him out of the way. Now, a little background on Barry. He was feared. He's always been kind of problematic since he was little. He was never a bully, but he just never took crap from anybody, ever. Now, while I didn't agree with the way he handled things, I've always respected how he stands up for himself and for the people he cares about. It's worth mentioning that he's a lot more calm now. Within seconds of him going into the store, and after hearing how belligerent that manager was, Barry lost control over his rage, and we saw him start throwing punches at the manager. Other employees joined in on the fight too, and all hell broke loose. Me, Han, and another friend of ours immediately jumped into the store. We started to trade punches with whoever was fighting. It was an utter cluster F. All I remember was that I punched the manager a few times and then I was on the ground. I didn't get punched or anything and still have no idea how I ended up on the ground, but luckily no one got really injured from either side, but we had a clear advantage over them. The aftermath was still horrific. Glass was broken, shelves were knocked down, and product stands were destroyed. I still remember M&Ms scattered all over the floor. It was a hot mess. At that time, we knew we were absolutely effed. We pretty much vandalized a whole store and physically assaulted its staff. Eventually, we left and stood in front of the store and started cussing them out. They stayed inside the store because they knew that the law would be on their side while they're on their property. So, about the laws in that country. They make absolutely no effing sense whatsoever. A good example of its ridiculous laws is that if you get physically assaulted by someone and you decide you want to press charges, and you do just that, you will need to go get a doctor's note stating your injury, and then head to a police station and press charges. The person who assaulted you will get a phone call from the police telling them to come to the police station. That person can also press charges the same way, even if they're not injured at all. If both parties have pressed charges, both parties will go to jail awaiting trial unless bailed out. It's also worth mentioning that obtaining a fake doctor's note in that country is easier than buying a tub of sour cream. And I'm not even kidding. That said, we knew that we better hurry up and press charges. We got to the police station before the supermarket staff and filed a complaint against them. They eventually arrived like 15 minutes later to do the same thing. It was the a-hole manager and another guy that was in the fight too. At the police station, it was a shock to me how nicely we were being treated by officers and how crappy they treated the supermarket staff. Like, what the F is going on? Shouldn't we be in handcuffs right now? What I didn't know was that while we were standing out the door cussing those guys out after the fight, Barry disappeared. He did meet us at the police station, but we didn't know what he was doing after the fight ended. Well, it turns out that while Barry was exiting the store after the fight, he started yelling, "My name is Barry, last name, and I'm not done effing you up." Apparently, a passing by police patrol heard Barry yell at the top of his lungs and stopped to see what was going on. Out of sheer coincidence, one of the patrolling officers turned out to be a distant cousin of Barry. It's a small country, and he recognized his name while he was shouting it. He took Barry aside for a word and started asking him what was going on. Barry explained the entire story of how they insulted his mom after selling her bad chicken and refused to admit any wrongdoing. The officer also turned out to be an on-duty health and safety inspector. He then took it personally and assured Barry that he'd take care of it. Anyway, back to the police station. Now that both parties have pressed charges, the police were clearly favoring us. They threw the supermarket staff in a cell while we were sitting on the couch sipping coffee. Barry was still cursing the manager out. Eventually, we reached an agreement to drop all charges, and we all went our separate ways. Now, the real revenge. After the store was picked up and everything went back to normal, kinda, Barry's officer cousin went to the supermarket for an inspection the next day. Do you see where this is going? Yup, he found tons and tons of badly stored meat of all kinds that was completely inedible and could be potentially life-threatening. He also found spoiled dairy and a buttload of expired items. Apparently, the owner orders the staff to unplug the fridges and freezers at night to save on electricity. The owner was knowingly selling rotten meat to save a few bucks. The store was immediately shut down pending investigation. The health ministry got involved and fined the supermarket, and the fine was so huge that the store stayed shut down and never opened again because the owners weren't able to financially recover. Stories like this definitely make me very grateful to live in a first world country. If something like this ever happened in America, it would without a doubt make national news. And I really do feel for people that live in countries where that isn't necessarily the case. But things like this could have turned out so much worse, so I'm very glad it all worked out for the OP and Barry. I hope you enjoyed today's stories, and I will see you in the next one.